Om Namah Shivaya. So, hope everyone is okay, doing well. And this workshop is about how to integrate the four paths of yoga and understanding what that means for us. You're very far away. Is it possible? Okay, there's some up here too. Otherwise, you may not hear me. So, when we talk about the four paths of yoga, we're talking about karma yoga, bhakti yoga, raja yoga, and jnana yoga, of course. And when we start our journey, we can see the trait of our character is very different from the traits of other people's character, correct? Yeah. Yes. And because we're so different, we cannot understand the path of another person. But when you become more advanced in your practice, you become more closer to the truth of who you are, your core essence. Come back to your center more. Begin to realize yourself more. And at that time, you begin to rely on your immortal self. Before that time, what are we relying on? We're relying on all those character traits of our personality. Oh, I can do this. This is my other strength over here. These are my weaknesses. I have to stay away from them. But then as you progress on the path, you start to rely more and more on your true self. How is it in the beginning? What does the yogi do in regards to their strength and their weaknesses? How does the yogi address their strengths and weaknesses? So we have Narasimha saying, use your strengths to overcome your weaknesses. To work on the weaknesses. What else?
I was going to say that we should see them as the same.
See strengths and weaknesses as the same.
Or maybe not favor one to another.
Maybe not favor one to another. The yogi is the one who looks at their weaknesses and is willing to address them. Whereas, when we're just sort of relying on our own kind of habits and instincts, we're not really confronting our weaknesses so much. We're oftentimes just sort of, I can work around this, or I can pretend it's not there. We sort of deny a little bit. I say we deny a little bit, probably we deny a lot, right? Let's not kid. So it's a real thing. We're trying to navigate our life, and that's why we get engaged in habits that aren't healthy, because, this is what feels kind of okay for me, even though it's not the right thing, but it's at least I'm not dealing with that other thing. It's that escapism and that denial. So as we advance on the spiritual path, however, we start to, we're learning from our weaknesses, we address our weaknesses, we sort of confront them in a way, because we engage in the sadhana to overcome our weaknesses. And that's part of the practice, is to identify what those are in ourselves. So you become more and more devotional. You become more selfless. We've been talking all about selflessness this whole weekend. You become more concentrated. That means you're not subject to all the distractions around. And you become more wise. And in the beginning, when we talk about all the different aspects of our character, when we come to yoga, what does that mean? Oh, this part of yoga appeals to me, or this part of yoga appeals to me, meaning I identify with karma yoga more, or bhakti yoga feels more right to me, or raja yoga or jnana yoga, like this. As you become more advanced, and we can say more integrated in our personality, we see that all the yogas become one. Yeah. The devotion is in my service. The service is in my devotion. Raja Yoga is very analytical, so we're aware of our weaknesses, we're aware of our strengths, we're aware of our tendencies, but then we start to work with them, and that also becomes part of our devotion, part of our service, and vice versa. I might practice Bhakti Yoga as a means of working with one of those tendencies that I see through Raja Yoga. Yeah, it's like, oh, there's that negative thought pattern in my mind, so where do I go? I go to Bhakti Yoga to help me with that. And Jnana Yoga is in that as well. So that's why the advanced person, someone who's been practicing a long time, they can work with many different personalities. But, where we are oftentimes, it's like, I can work with this person, but I can't work with this person. The more we purify ourselves, we see the integration of those four paths, and then we see these are different aspects of our personality that each path is addressing, So Karma Yoga is very much about smoothing out the rough edges of our ego, or the angularity of the way we see things. Yeah. That means how I see other people, how I interact with other people. Like, this person I can serve, but this person over here I can't serve. In the beginning it's like that. Yeah. And then what do we say? Well, go serve that person who gives you a hard time. That's the person that's going to teach you the most. Not because they're your teacher, but the process is teaching us. Yeah, engaging in it like that. The more that we do that through all the different paths, and as we progress, we start to have a greater, we say, like a 360-degree view of everything. We can see everything rather than just seeing our narrow picture of who we are in relation to others, like this, right? So then you're not focusing on the differences, you're focusing on the unity and the connections, but that underlying truth of all of us, that essence of all of us. You see that rather than, oh, here's that personality, here's this personality, this is this way, and so on, like this. And you know how we are, we get so fixated on this stuff, right? It's like, I get lost in it. So self-realization is the state that we see the truth, or the Atman in all. And when we can see the Atman in all, we don't see any difference because everything is the Atman. Yeah. And the personality, those traits are still present, but these are not, they're in the background. They don't determine how much I connect to somebody. That's not what it's about. It's about something deeper. We connect at the heart. So that advanced person can meet everyone where they are. So you meet those people and they can adapt themselves to every kind of personality that they come into contact with. Until you come across a personality you haven't seen before. Which will happen eventually. But even then, yeah. Because you see through all of this. So, it's something to think about in our practice is when we do come up against some kind of resistance in the relationship, the personality, what is that? What am I resisting? What am I honing in on that is causing me to have this feeling? Yeah. So it's just something for each of us to think about. That's when you recognize your own tendencies. It's like, oh, that's this aspect of my personality that is apparently rubbing up against the aspect of that over here, but it's really about me here. And by recognizing that, then you can start to see how you work with it. And so that's why we have all the different paths of yoga to do that with. So we have the story of the devotee, and actually it's the story of Arjuna and Krishna, and Arjuna says to Krishna, am I your greatest devotee? And Arjuna loves Krishna, so he's like, I'm your greatest devotee, right? And Krishna says, no, actually there's a man over in this village here, go and visit him. And Arjuna is like, how can it be? Yeah. So Arjuna goes to that village, to the temple where this man is apparently supposed to be, and he walks into the temple and he sees this old man there, and he's reclining and he has his feet up on the altar. And Arjuna is a little bit shocked. He's like, how can you have your feet on the altar? That's not okay. You cannot do that. And he says, hey, please remove your feet from the altar. And the man says to Arjuna, he says, please tell me where I can put my feet where God is not. So what does he see? What does he know? He sees God in everything and everyone. Yeah, he has that 360-degree view of reality, where we're always like, I see God here, but over here I don't see. Yeah. So it's a bit describing the goal. So the journey that we're on, according to Swami Sivananda, is summed up in his teaching on the yoga of synthesis. This is the teaching of Swami Sivananda, and how we integrate the four paths of yoga. So you can see other spiritual traditions, and they might focus on one or two paths. So it might be karma yoga and bhakti yoga primarily, and then the other aspects of yoga aren't so much touched upon. Or it might be strictly jnana yoga, but then it's not so much the other paths of yoga. So if we practice jnana yoga exclusively, what's the danger of jnana yoga exclusively? This is the philosophical, intellectual practice. Yeah. Not enough cultivation of the heart. You're actually cultivating a lot of intellectual energy, right? And so you start to, and then what can happen to our intellect? Yeah, it becomes very close to the ego already. So what happens potentially is that we get, even in our regular life, we take pride in our intellect. It's like, oh, I'm very smart. I can solve these problems. But we lack heart when this happens. We lose connection with the heart. Yeah. If we practice bhakti yoga more or less exclusively, what happens? What's the danger in bhakti yoga? Huh? You lose touch with the intellect? Pride in your connection with God, which we can say fanaticism. Yeah? Fanaticism. It becomes, bhakti yoga is the practice of transforming emotion into devotion, but it can be also, if it's too much one avenue, it can be really more emotion than you think. So in both of these cases, you need, in bhakti yoga, it's helpful to have that jnana yoga also alongside to keep the intellectual discrimination there. Yeah, one way we can practice jnana yoga is by reading the scriptures, and that keeps us grounded, so we don't become too rajasic, emotional, excited in our connection, like this. So we have to be, we say, head in heaven but feet on the ground, like this. Otherwise, what fanaticism looks like. It would be very dangerous to other people. It's dangerous to yourself. Yeah. On the jnana yoga side, if we're practicing jnana yoga, we need to have bhakti yoga there to temper the intellect. Because the too much intellect, we get intellectual pride, right? And then it becomes very dry. Heart's not open. So we need to keep cultivating that feeling, that devotion, so our heart can open. And so they work together like this. Yeah. Of course, the best practice for all of this is karma yoga. because karma yoga keeps us humble no matter what. Yeah, we've been talking all about this. So if we talk about the why of our practice, what is the goal of our practice? Our goal is to realize the self, to realize the Atman, and then to see the Atman in all that we meet. The Atman in the human being, but in the animals, all the living beings of this creation is the Atman. So we can talk a little bit about Bhakti Yoga. What is the Bhakti Yoga path? We've been talking about Karma Yoga already, so I think we can we can pass on that for a little while anyway. But Bhakti Yoga, we say, is the transformation of emotion to devotion. So it's primarily working with the emotional energy of the mind. And the mind, according to Swami Sivananda, is 95% emotional. So that doesn't leave a lot of room for balance. It's just the nature of our mind. And we live in this Kali Yuga, which is the time of negative emotion. So this is a universal kind of experience that we're having in terms of the emotions. In Bhakti Yoga, we are situating ourselves in our relationship with the divine, in whatever way that you see that. It's up to us how we see that and experience that. So it's based on duality, me, the individual, and whatever form of God that I experience, like this. Jnana Yoga in the beginning says everything is one and united. But Bhakti Yoga says, no, there's me and there's God. Yeah. And the practice of Bhakti Yoga is to bring myself closer to that divine, and I begin to slowly invoke that divine consciousness within myself, which means it's already there waiting to be awakened and waiting to be experienced, waiting to be realized. So in the beginning, it's me, and then, okay, here's a statue. Or here's a picture. Or maybe here's a mountain. It can be whatever you want it to be. But what we don't necessarily see that, do we? It's hard for us to see. You see someone worshiping a stone, it doesn't necessarily make sense to our mind. So there's a story. A Western woman is being toured around India with an Indian Swami, and he's taking her to different temples, and it's new for her, the experience. And they go into the temple and they're worshiping the Shiva Lingam, and the Shiva Lingam is a stone. And people can be very, very devotional, intense. And the people are worshiping the stone, the lingam, and to her Western mind, it doesn't make any sense. Why they worship this rock, I don't get it. So later they're on the bus, and she starts to show a photograph of her son around and say, oh, look at him. He's this many years old. He has these qualities. He does all these wonderful things. I'm so proud of him. And she's showing everyone, and then the Swami says, may I see your photograph? And he takes it, and then he's about to tear the photograph. And how do you think she responds to this? Yeah, she said, no, that's my son. You can't tear him in half like that. So what is that? What does she see in that piece of paper? Huh? Yeah, she sees her son. Yeah. That piece of paper is symbolic of her son, as if he were right there, real in front of her. Just as those people worshiping the Shiva Lingam, they see Shiva right there present with them. in this way. So when we talk about, what is this? These are symbols that we consciously utilize to bring ourselves closer to God, closer to the divine. We consciously use these symbols like tools for us to relate to that divinity. Yeah. So this is what the yogis do. Bhakti yoga is a science in this way. We use these different symbols so we can draw ourselves closer to God and know God. Yeah. So the other night we had Krishna Janmashtami. We had beautiful pujas here at the Krishna temple, and we bathed Sri Krishna, and we put garlands on him, and dressed him, and then gave him prasad, and then we had the little Balakrishna statue, and we put him in the swing, and we all swung him. And it's beautiful. The feeling is so beautiful. And you dance, you chant, you enjoy the prasad, and you're just in the energy of that. We call it worship. But what is this? But it just takes you over. And you don't question what it looks like to anybody else. It's like, I'm with Krishna. I'm swinging baby Krishna. It's so beautiful. Yeah. And so the practice of bhakti yoga, when we talk about the emotions and what it means to transform these emotions into devotion, we call that sublimation. So sublimation is taking an energy and transforming it into a positive. So whatever energy, that lower vibration, you transform it into a higher vibration. Yeah. So you might have a negative thought, but then you start to chant a little kirtan. Like last night we had beautiful kirtan, and you start to chant, and whatever thoughts you came there with are gone. And you're just in it. Yeah? You're lifted up out of your particular level of consciousness and experience something outside of your ego. Yeah. So it's said that our true nature is pure love. Your true nature is pure love. Any other emotion or any emotion that you experience is a distortion of that pure love. Yeah. What does that mean? Distortion of your pure love. That means we misidentify with the reality, and that brings in all kinds of other feelings and emotions. Like Swamiji was talking about unity and diversity this morning, and the wave sees the other wave and starts to compare itself, and all kinds of feelings come out of that. But we forget that we're all the same. Like the wave and the big wave and the small wave are the same H2O. We are all the same spirit. But then I start to compare myself to you, and you do this, and I don't like that, and we forget. We're lost in that individuality again. But when we practice bhakti yoga, whether we're doing puja or chanting kirtan or reading the stories, it lifts us out of our sense of self, that individualized sense of self, right? So this is, as emotional beings, what we do to work with our emotions. And as Mangalananda said so nicely yesterday, he was talking about bhakti yoga, and he said, people think that it's all just sort of dancing and singing, but actually it's about concentrating the mind. And to practice bhakti yoga properly, you have to concentrate the mind. So we had the beautiful kirtan with Mangalananda last night, and what I just kind of generally put out the question, what do you pick up from him that you can see that is, how does he concentrate his mind and concentrate our minds? Yeah. Yeah, through the music, but what about how he does that? So there's a heart opening, and that comes from, yeah. You can feel his devotion very strongly, right? And that also comes through that devotion and that kind of sense of concentration. They're all merged together.
Yeah.
It's so focused because he's actually focused on the divine. And you can feel his experience. I don't mean just the experience in the moment, but I mean his lifetime of experience also. The richness of this. Yeah. So you just hear his stories and you can just listen and listen and listen. It's like, okay, keep talking. I'm fine with that. Yeah. It's so beautiful. So bhakti yoga is that, and we surrender ourselves. We keep surrendering. I mean, again, we kind of touched on this idea of surrender, but surrendering your thoughts, those thoughts you carry with you, we repeat those thoughts. In the Western mind, in our society in the West, we're much more oriented toward Raja Yoga. We have kind of scientific, analytical minds in the West, but if you go to India, what do you find? Narasimha?
It's more bhakti yoga.
Yeah, it's more bhakti yoga.
I was thinking it's more like wisdom and practices and practicing wisdom.
So Narasimha says he's thinking it's more like wisdom and practices and wisdom.
Practicing wisdom.
Practicing wisdom. Much more devotional practices. Yeah. So you go around India, you'll find temples everywhere. Even in the middle of a busy intersection, there might be a temple right there. Because you always need God, especially when there's lots of traffic. But it's beautiful, you know. It's everywhere you turn, you see. Oh, you're reminded. Yeah.
People don't think as much. They just believe in the existence of the. I mean, they don't even question that it's an idol. It's more like there is God sitting there and there is real life in it.
Yeah.
He'll take care of all our problems like that. Like
Yeah.
It's more emotional. Like for the mind, it needs something that it can believe onto and stick onto, and that's where God will be.
So what Narasimha is saying now, he's an Indian man here. People are more devotional, and when they don't just see an idol, but they see God there. Yeah, and they believe, and God is always taking care of them. Yeah, yeah.
Even if God is not taking care of them.
Even if God is not taking care of them, God is taking care of them. We may feel that God is not taking care of us, but even then, yeah. So there's a joke. I'll see if I can tell it. Let's see. The joke is that, here in the West, no one sees God because nothing really goes wrong. But in India, the power goes out, or the water goes out, something like that. And you always pray to God, like this. So we're reminded all the time. But here, everything's working all the time. We don't think of it, like this. So, but it's true. What reminds us of God? We might say our suffering reminds us of God, but sometimes we blame God for our suffering too. So this is, what is the nature of our devotion? Do I have a positive relationship with God or the divine? Do I have faith in the divine that God is taking care of me? Or is it, because people do. People argue with their God,
It's almost like in the West we have this kind of idea that I personally can make my reality, this whole manifestation through your personal mind. And it's kind of a burden, because then if you don't manifest it or something goes wrong, you're to blame.
Yeah.
Whereas
So
in other cultures, it seems like it's more like fate or karma. You know, there's a lot of respect given that I'm powerless, like the first step. You know, like I'm not in charge here.
yeah. So what Jayadurga is saying is, here in the West, in our Western mind, we often think that we're the one making our reality, and that it's in our hands. We take responsibility for our lives and the direction that everything is supposed to go in, and manifesting it for ourselves. And then when it doesn't go the right way, what do we say? We blame ourselves out of this. Yeah. So the true bhakta, the attitude is, it's not my will, it's thy will. I'm not the doer. So you see how bhakti yoga and karma yoga come together very often, that service and devotion are hand in hand. And everything happens for the best. This is not a fatalistic kind of statement, you know. It's actually just an acceptance. You know, it is what it is. I can control what? What can I control? If you're driving on the busy freeway and the traffic and people cut you off and all kinds of things are happening, you have no control over this. What do? You can curse them. Does it help you? It certainly doesn't help them either. Yeah. Or we can accept it and stay calm and say, well, this is out of my control. Yeah. Swami Sivananda says life is a conscious stream. What is our role? What are we doing in the conscious stream of life? Are we trying to manipulate it? Are we trying to redirect it? Conscious stream means it's a consciousness that is not, it's not my ego. That's not consciousness. That's just, I want things to be a certain way and they're not. Yeah. And then we suffer for that. So we have this analogy of the baby kitten, and the baby kitten is just, the mother picks up the baby kitten and completely, you see how they are, they're just completely relaxed, right? They're just totally surrendered. And this is the attitude of the bhakta. Can we really surrender ourselves in this way? It doesn't mean we are a victim to anything. It's not it at all. But we understand that we're not in charge of everything. And say, okay, God directs me in this way, and if we can have that devotional attitude, it will come through properly. So we say to be empty as Krishna's flute. If the flute is not empty, what kind of music are you going to get? It's going to, yeah, you play the flute, so you know you're going to get some strange sounds coming out of there, or it won't work. But if we can empty ourselves like Krishna's flute, we can allow the divine breath to flow through us. And that's when the beautiful harmonies come out, right? Yeah, question?
No, I'm having difficulty breathing up here. So
Yeah.
it takes me.
Okay. No worries, Abhaya. Okay. So the idea is that we have to be flexible and adaptable, and you know, the struggle is always coming from us. You know, I work really hard to get things a certain way for my life, for myself. But can I begin to turn that around? In the beginning it feels like struggle because we're adapting. But the more you do that, the less and less struggle it feels, and then you become, you know, I can really serve here. I'm happy to do it this way. You know, it's not the way that I imagined, but I'm happier now. I'm more relaxed. So there's the story of the king, and has a minister, and the minister is always saying, everything happens for the best, O king. And he says that all the time. And the king's kind of annoyed that he says that all the time. He got lots of responsibilities, things happen. And then they're out hunting, and the king has an accident. He falls off his horse and he loses his thumb. And he's hunting with a bow and arrow, so he's really upset. And he can't shoot his bow and arrow, and the minister says, well, king, everything happens for the best. This sends the king into a rage. He's so upset. And so he sends him to the prison cell in the castle. later on, the king is out riding again, and he gets lost in the forest, and then he's captured by this tribe, and the tribe wants to sacrifice the king. And so they're preparing him for the sacrifice, and they're checking him out, and they realize he's missing a thumb. And so they see him and they say, oh, we can't offer him. He's not a perfect offering now. So they let him go. He's so relieved, and he finds his way back to the castle, and he goes running to the minister, and he says, you are right, you're right. Everything does happen for the best, because if I had had my thumb, I would be dead at this time. Yeah. And the minister's so happy, and he's released from the cell, and then he says, the king says to the minister, but I put you in this jail cell, and you say everything happens for the best. What's good about this? How did that work? And the minister is very wise, and he just says, well, if I had been with you, king, and they released you, but they would have taken me, I have all my fingers and everything, and they would have sacrificed me. So, but what is the meaning of this story? There's one level of everything's happening for the best. There's something a little more going on there. Huh? Okay, it's all happening, but what is that? You have to elaborate. Okay, so maybe our ability to see a limitation, which could be whatever is going on in that circumstance, but to see it as a possibility. So,
Or like the Buddhist story where there is no good or bad, or lucky or not lucky.
or like the Buddha story where there's no good or bad, lucky or not lucky, neither exist in reality. But it's our mind that will project onto this circumstance and say, oh, this is not good. And the mistake that we make is that our mind is really good at drawing conclusions about things. That means we've decided what it is. But we don't know how it will be, right? So the king, he's sitting there, he's going to be sacrificed, and it doesn't look good. Doesn't mean we're always feeling good about things. But in the end, he didn't know what would happen. And we think the story ends here, but it actually hasn't ended yet. Yeah. So what it means is we don't know the karma, and we're very often jumping to conclusions about how things are and how versus how we want them to be, and that's what causes us suffering. And so the bhakta is one who is saying, I don't know what this is, and that's fine. I don't need to know, but I'm in it. And I'm experiencing it, and it's God's will and not my will. Yeah, we never really know. We like to think we know, but we never really know. So what does that mean? Relax. It will be what it will be. Yeah. Even though we have all kinds of ideas around what we want it to be or not to be, like this. And then there's the story, I think it's a Christian story actually, but the devotee is walking in the sand and walking with God, and there's two sets of footprints, and they're walking together, and then suddenly something very difficult happens, and the devotee is suffering and struggling, very challenging thing, and the devotee is looking for God and only sees one set of footprints and becomes very distressed. And, when we face challenges, we might feel this, right? It's like, where are you? I need you. I don't see you. And the devotee is looking and questioning God, where were you when I needed you the most at this time? And God answers and says, yes, when you were struggling so much and you looked and you only saw one set of footprints, it was I who was carrying you. So what happens? when we face these difficult challenges, are we remembering? Or we fall back into our isolation, right? We feel like this individual again, all alone. How do I get through this? How do I do it? That's why it's really important, very practical, is when you have problems arise, talk to other people, because then you see that other people actually have those problems too. It's not unique to me. It's actually, these are universal experiences. That's why you have all these self-help groups. But you know, all of these things that we think are very difficult, and they can be very difficult, of course, but they're not unique to us as much as we think. We fall into the isolation of our own mind all the time like this. So this is Bhakti Yoga. I'll send out a text to everybody, but the 9 modes of Bhakti, which are the practices of Bhakti Yoga that you can use to cultivate your relationship. And it includes chanting kirtan, listening to stories, worship and service, becoming a friend to God, and ultimately realizing that you are that. You know, it's the 9 modes, and it's an evolution like this. And it's very nice because it talks about it in very practical terms, because when we talk about listening to stories of the divine, what it means is when you relate to another person, you're listening to their story because they are the divine. So our ability to listen to others. And then when you sing the praises of God, it means also to sing the praises of the people around you in your life. Like this. So it's not just about this idea of God out here, but God is here. You know, this person in front of you is that.
So what's the distinction between the service of bhakti yoga and the service of karma yoga?
Yeah, so the question is, what's the distinction between service and bhakti yoga and karma yoga? And they blend together. And it's actually, when we talk about the 4 paths of yoga, usually we begin with karma yoga, because anyone can help. You know, anyone can carry the dishes or mow the lawn, anything like this. So this is usually a starting point for most people like this. But then the next thing, you know, by practicing this, you start to develop a feeling of like, oh, you know, this feels right to me. It's our nature to give and to serve. It's part of our essence, like this. So when we start to actually put that into practice, we start to connect back to that feeling, and that's the devotion coming through. You have another question in there?
No, it's more of a personal one, but
Okay. Yeah. So I give you another story which I like very much. Is there's a man, and an angel comes to this man and he says, I'd like to show you heaven and hell. Would you like to see heaven and hell? So if someone asks you that, would you like to see heaven and hell? I don't know. But he says, sure, I would like to see that. What does that look like? And so the angel brings him to this banquet hall. And the man looks into the banquet hall and he sees a long banquet table and people sitting on either side of the banquet table. And there's huge feast of food there. Everything that you could ever desire. It's not even just food, it's all the things you like the most. So, danger. And all the people are there, and then he looks closer and he sees these people have a spoon, a big long wooden spoon tied to their arm, both arms. And so their arms are straightened out like this, and they're trying to get the food, and they can't get it into their mouths because it doesn't work like that. And so you see them, and they're all this desire for this food, and they're suffering so much because it's there, but they can't have it. And he says, okay, now I'll show you heaven, okay? And they go to another banquet hall, and he looks, and on the table is all this sumptuous feast again, all those wonderful foods and everything, and all these people are lined up on the either side of the table sitting there, and they also have their arms tied with these spoons, and they're picking up the food, and he hears them, and they're just having a wonderful time. They're just having a joyous time, and what are they doing? They're feeding each other. Yeah. So, are we feeding each other? Or are we struggling with, I need this? Yeah. And if we can break through the idea of, I have to do it for myself rather than doing it for somebody else, that's how we start to connect to our devotion, right? I think Mangalananda said it yesterday. Could have been Ramananda, I forgot. Either way, it's divine voices speaking to us. But it was just something about what did he say? It's just the feeling. In the end, we're not seeing an other there, it's our own self. And you serve that own self. And you, as Swamiji said, the first talk, you're doing this for yourself. But you expand your understanding of what that means in terms of, who am I? And in the beginning, I'm just this person. And I'm doing this for this person. But the more that I do that, I start to expand this feeling of selfhood outward. And then it's like, oh, you're my own self. Okay, this is my community. I can serve you. I can work with you, you know. And then from there, we might expand it out even a little further and a little further. But you see in our world, how many divisions are there? You know, I'm from this country, or you're from that country, I can't talk to you. You know, you see people for generations, countries fighting each other, nations fighting each other, but if you talk to the individual people, they're like, we don't want that. Why does it happen? So it starts with us very small, and then you expand out just a little bit. Yeah. And Swami Sivananda, you know, the ashram grew up around Swami Sivananda, and he was, you know, the director. He was the guru. But what did Swami Sivananda do every day? He would wake up, and he would look to see who he can serve. So he would help somebody with something, finish whatever that was, and then he would look for the next opportunity to be of service to someone. That was his practice and his example, all wrapped together like this. That's just all he did. And he served to the final breath. Yeah. And there's a story where he prescribed medicine to someone, and then the man left and he forgot the medicine. And then finally, like an hour later, Swami Sivananda realized that the man had left the medicine behind, and he went running for miles to catch up to this man to bring him his medicine. Yeah. So that was his mindset was so selfless all the time, and he would see patients before he became Swami Sivananda, but he would see his patients, and they were poor, and very often he would give them money on the way out the door. Not many doctors give you money on the way out the door, right? So, but think about this for ourselves here today. Like, how do we cultivate this feeling of abundance in ourselves, this simplicity in ourselves, this humility in ourselves, and how can we give in just the most simple way? What is the simplest thing that we can do here right now? It doesn't mean saving the world. It just means, you know, whatever this is. Yeah. I think often we get caught up in our thoughts so much we kind of paralyze ourselves. Like, it's not significant enough what I do. Yeah. But it's just like, no, this person right here. It's like Mother Teresa, that person right there, she helped them. Yeah. It's an attitude. It's a way of seeing and feeling. Okay, we're supposed to talk about the other passive yoga. We use most of the time in bhakti yoga, which is great. But Raja Yoga is the scientific path. It includes Hatha Yoga as well, which is the practical side. Raja Yoga, we can say, is a spiritual science. It is a step-by-step approach laid out in the Raja Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And the sutra says yogas chitta vritti nirodha, which means yoga is the cessation of the thought waves. Yoga means union of the individual soul with the universal. That means self-realization occurs when you transcend the mind. So this is the Raja Yoga path. Within the Raja Yoga path are many, many practices which are composed of the 8 limbs of Raja Yoga. And the foundation of this, most importantly, is the yamas and niyamas. You know, we can't really have a full in-depth discussion on these right now, but we can see them as ethical guidelines that help us to channel our prana into the right direction. So when we talk about ahimsa and not causing harm, this is helping us to refrain from those tendencies that would take us away from ourselves. Yeah. When we talk about truthfulness, when we're not truthful, it's because of what emotion? Fear. Yeah. Fear causes us not to be truthful. Brahmacharya is the moderation of the sensual energy, which is basically, the senses and the mind, controlling that energy, controlling our prana. Asteya means non-stealing, which means what are the things that we desire or that we feel that we need to have, but maybe we don't really need to have those things.
Chocolate?
Yeah, chocolate. Yeah.
4 bathrooms.
Hmm?
I don't know, I heard this thing about how Americans have the most bathrooms in their home already.
Okay. Yeah. Well, okay. So this example here is Jess is saying, having 4 bathrooms in your home, but it really speaks to the idea that bigger is better, more is better, this kind of thing, and there's never enough. Yeah. So it's...
More bathrooms, digestive issues.
Okay. So, asteya also means non-stealing, which means not taking more than you need. And not taking from planet Earth more than you need. And you can see the humanity is taking more than it needs from the planet Earth. So this is also part of it. So we say simple living, high thinking. Just be simple. Conserve your prana, direct your prana where it needs to go, but don't indulge your prana. Yeah. Don't indulge your senses. Aparigraha means non-covetousness, non-accumulation. Also just be simple, clean. It's kind of like saying don't live a transactional kind of life. Like I give this to you, I expect something back. So you see the yogis, they don't want to get into any entanglement in relationship. If you want to give them something, they may accept, they may not accept. If it's useful, but they also check the motivation of the person offering it to them. Yeah. Swamiji tells the story when she was in the Himalayas and she had someone bring some socks to the yogi up in the cave, and socks would be like a premium item up in the Himalayas. And so, but what did he do? He sort of received them and he sort of felt the vibration and he did not accept them. You and me would be like, socks? Yeah, thank you so much. Come have dinner. But
What was the vibration you think he felt?
I don't know. I mean, he just say, I don't feel want to feel anything in terms of the, like, what is the motivation of the person. And so maybe he's just putting a pause on everything, who knows. Actually, Swamiji become very close with this yogi in the end, but the first time like that he did not accept. So it's like a more of an indication of his own caution, his own discrimination, like this. Can we have this level of discrimination ourselves in everything that we're interacting with? Do I really need this? Is this so important to me? That's my motivation too. Yeah. So the yamas are like that. They keep us in check how we use our energy. The niyamas is the saucha, the purity, more relating to our individual practices as niyamas, keeping yourself pure in, physically, but also in thoughts. So you don't want to expose yourself to the media too much, all these disparate thoughts that are out there that we let into our minds. It's very dangerous for our well-being to do that. So we have to be very aware. The practice of santosha, or contentment. We might think of contentment as kind of something that happens, but it's something that we can cultivate. It's a practice. When you are content, you're not thinking of the past or the future. So how do we keep bringing ourselves into the present? At that time, I feel like I don't need anything. I'm peaceful. We've all had that experience where we feel, I am. And I feel so fulfilled in that. And then a short time passes and we lose it, right? It's like we're back into the need again, like this. But contentment is something that we can cultivate, and we can cultivate that actually through bhakti yoga practices. It's like, I have enough. God provides for me. Divine Mother provides for me everything that I need. I'm good, like this. And then tapas. Tapas is the austerity, the self-discipline. We practice tapas because we know that there will be a healthy outcome. Something good will come of it. So something good comes of waking up at 5:30 every morning and meditating. Yeah, that's a tapas, but it's good. Yeah, I actually have more energy doing that. Yeah, or asana and pranayam. My mind is more calm. I have more energy. I'm more focused. Meditation is tapas, so this is concentration. Yeah. Swadhyaya, self-study. Reading scripture. Self-study also means studying your own mind. So watching your own mind. Meditation is part of that. And then lastly is the Ishvara Pranidhana, which is self-surrender, which is so kind of elusive for us to talk about. But, what does it mean to surrender yourself? I think it was brought up yesterday, without losing yourself, right? We talked about that? Yeah. So you have to surrender with discrimination at the same time. Yeah. So like you have the great Saint Ramakrishna, and his chief disciple is Swami Vivekananda. When Swami Vivekananda first came to Ramakrishna, he kind of go back and forth. He'd go do worldly things, and then he'd come back to Ramakrishna because he knew something. And Vivekananda had a Western education in India, so he had a kind of a discriminating mind like that. So when he saw the mystical side of Ramakrishna, he had to investigate. What is that? I don't know how to relate to this. And so he would test Ramakrishna from time to time. He put coins under his mattress, and Ramakrishna, they say if he touched money, he said it would burn him, like this. And so one time Vivekananda snuck some coins under his mattress where Ramakrishna would sit. He'd always sit on his bed and talk to the devotees. And he felt something, and he found the coins under the mattress like this. So he had little tests and have them confirmed. So it cultivated his faith like this. So his surrender came slowly. So surrender comes with faith and trust. It doesn't mean blind faith. It means you might take a little bit of what the teacher is offering, and then you experiment with it, and you see the result yourself. The teacher said it would be like this, and then you see, is it? Yeah, okay. I have a little more faith and trust like this. So it's something that comes slowly also. Any question here? This is very, very fast. Going over these. Okay. And then lastly, Jnana Yoga is the path of self-inquiry. In Jnana Yoga, the central question is, who am I? And we have many ways to ask the question of who am I? But that's the core question. And people would come to Ramana Maharishi, whose main teaching was you ask the question, who am I? So when they would ask him, well, what's the meaning of life? Or, what is the secret? Whatever they're asking him. And he would just simply say, find out who's asking the question. So what's he doing? He's putting it back on us. Only we can answer the question. But the question is, who am I? Am I this body? Am I this bundle of thoughts with all these crazy ideas that go on within our minds? Yeah. And so then you ask the question, if I'm this body, but then I look at all my photographs through my life, I'm a baby, I'm a little older, and then I'm a teenager, and then I'm a mature person, and then I'm an older person, and I line up all these photographs, and I look at them, and some of them I may not recognize that person. It's like, yeah, that was me, but man, where did that come from? Yeah. So then you see the physical body is not you, because the body changes. Yeah. Body's changing right now. It's doing things. Yeah, we don't know. So I'm not this physical body. But there's something that I see in each of those images or from those periods of times that I know that is me. So what is that thread? Who is that? Yeah. It's a consciousness, the Atman. If I'm in a car accident and I lose my arm, am I any less this person? Am I any less this consciousness? No. Yeah. I may have told some of you guys this story, but it's helpful. Is the story of Swami Devananda, and late in his life he was in a car accident and he was in the hospital, and Swami Sita went to see him in the hospital room, and she's thinking, oh, Swamiji, 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 it's like so terrible. And she came to the hospital room and he's hooked up to everything. And she's thinking, poor Swamiji, poor Swamiji, poor Swamiji. And she comes to the door and sees him there. And then she looks closely and she notices in his hand, he's turning the mala beads. So he's repeating his mantra. And at that moment she says, poor me. Why does she say, poor me? She's not chanting the mantra. She's saying, oh, Swamiji. Yeah. Yeah, she realized she's identifying him as the physical body. Like the physical body's in the hospital bed. But where is he? He is that consciousness. He's identifying with that. He's fine. No matter what happens to the body, he's fine. And later after that, he also had stroke, and he would be brought into the satsang hall in the bed to be in satsang with everyone. And the people around him at that time, they said he was a more powerful spiritual teacher at that time than when he was physically healthy like this. Yeah, because the spirit shined through more. Yeah. And you imagine, I find it just fascinating because young in his life, he's the most dynamic hatha yogi. Yeah. Physically, he can do anything. And even later in life, he's always doing headstands everywhere. There's a picture of him doing headstands all over the place. And, he's known for all of that. So physically, he's like completely dynamic and amazing. But then at the end of his life, it's a whole turnaround. And he says, he writes, younger in life, I could control the body, but not the mind. And now late in life, I can't control the body, but the mind is calm. He says something like this. It's quite beautiful. Yeah. So who are we? Yeah. So in the end, we practice the 4 paths of yoga to balance out the different aspects of our personality, which is, we have this active temperament, so we're geared for karma yoga. We have this emotional temperament. We might be very geared toward bhakti yoga. We have this kind of analytical, scientific mind, so we might be geared toward Raja Yoga. And we have a philosophical side of ourselves, which would be for Jnana Yoga. But before we start to train our minds through the 4 paths, we have different extremes. We're very much this way. I can be very overly rational, or I can be overly emotional. And so by practicing the 4 paths of yoga, integrating them, we begin to balance out these different aspects of our personality. And then this is an integrated, balancing head and heart. And actually, Swami Sivananda says, balance the head, heart, and the hands, which means you want to balance the head, the intellect, with the heart, so you can act in the world. Not so you can sit back and watch everything float by, but so you can be engaged with everything around you and be of service. And this is what the Gita teaching says, it's all that philosophy, but that philosophy is useless unless you apply it in life. So we need to integrate these different aspects of ourselves so we can serve this humanity and serve this world in harmony. We feel peace and harmony in the action, which means we're relaxed, we're not struggling, we feel good. Yeah. We can be very dynamic and engaged without stress and struggle, believe it or not. Yeah. So I want to conclude here, but any questions about how to apply any of this? Anyone from online want to jump in? So how are we incorporating Jnana Yoga in the Sivananda tradition? So here in the ashram, we practice the 4 paths of yoga every day. So this would be considered Jnana Yoga because we're talking about the teaching itself, the philosophy. And if we look at the daily practices here, what do we begin with? Meditation. So this is Raja Yoga, chanting, Bhakti Yoga. Then we hear a talk in the satsang, so this would also be Jnana Yoga. And then you have your asana practice, so this is Hatha Yoga. Karma Yoga, of course, is there. And so you can see that's the brilliance of Swami Sivananda, because he said little. So, a little of this, a little of this, a little of this, and this is this is what life looks like, doesn't it? It's not all just one thing. So then you can see it's everything I do is part of that. Yeah. And in all the 4 paths, every scripture is telling us that the devotion has to be there. Without the devotion, we cannot advance very far. Yeah. In fact, you start to run into your own self very quickly, your own ego very quickly, without that devotion. And when we can really truly practice devotion and opening our hearts, and then you see how everything just starts to open up for you. It's like all the other paths are there, but it's just opening because, somehow God is putting us where we need to be, right? Nothing is by accident. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah. So, the best thing I can say, I think, is just to do it every day in whatever way we can. And maybe that's a little bit of meditation, a little bit of asana, pranayama. I know we have busy lives and everything. But also take time for a retreat. Make that happen. And then you see how you integrate it into your daily. One other aspect of bhakti yoga that we look at is the yoga of relationships, which is to say that we're in relationship with everything all the time. So I'm in a relationship to my coconut water. And that reflects back on me. You know, what's my attitude toward this? But it's not just these close personal relationships, but we're in relationship with everything around us all the time, whether living or not. I'm in a relationship with objects too. And if I can really bring this awareness, I can really see how they're all reflecting back my own attitude, my own perception. Yeah. My understanding of myself is what it really boils down to. Yeah. Oh, I like this. I don't like this. I love this. I don't love this. Yeah. Or I'm peaceful, whatever I have, which is the goal. Okay. Yes.
So with the pandemic, I feel like many people became more in a relationship with technology.
Yeah, me too.
So how does, I don't know. How
So
do you do that?
the question is, with the pandemic, people have become more in relationship with technology than we ever thought we would. And we can see these things, you know, if we can see them as more instruments or vehicles for connection, that might be helpful. We talk about this sometimes here because we never really used technology like this before, and now we Zoom everywhere and we connect with people all over the world that we never would have connected with otherwise. And so this is very healthy, but at the same time you don't want to spend too much on Zoom. As much as we love to connect with everybody, but it just is what it is. Yeah, Sean? No? Okay. So as in anything, as in any relationship with anything, whether it's people or otherwise, we have to be aware of where our prana is going, what's the quality of that, is it feeling positive or not feeling positive? Is it serving others or not serving others? These are the criteria that we work through like this. And then you see for yourself. Just one final thought, you know, Swami Vishnu said, if something isn't positive, make it positive. You know? So that means don't blame it, don't complain about it, but it's in your hands to turn it around into something useful. And so that's another helpful guideline. Okay. Hari Om Tat Sat. Thank you all very much. Om.